Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship podcast. I am Chip Brown of Horns247.com, our fearless leader. My cohort on the Flagship podcast is off this week, so I am going to give you my recap of spring football, tell you what I'm excited about, what I'm cautiously optimistic about, and what I'm not sure about. And we'll just start with the offense and we'll just go. How's that sound? Obviously, let's start with my level of excitement. And I could not be more excited about the running back room. Not just Bijan Robinson, who, according to Pro Football Focus, broke the second most tackles in college football last year in Division One, behind Kenneth Walker III at Michigan State. But Deshawn Jameson, I mean, this guy showed again in the spring game, and when you talk to team sources behind the scenes, this guy's one of the most important leaders on the team. But how about the stiff arms from Rojo in the spring scrimmage? Wasn't really a game, but man, he let linebacker Devin Richardson have it, freshman corner Terrence Brooks have it, including a 56-yard touchdown run. So. But then you add in Jonathan Brooks and even Jaden Blue. I think Jonathan Brooks is a really special talent. And everything I've heard about Jaden Blue is that he's grasping the offense. He's caught the football really well. And I think, he reclassified. He's kind of like Quinn Ewers. He hasn't played football in a minute, but I just see the ceiling as being really high for him. And then Keelan Robinson, who was probably deprived of a touchdown in the spring scrimmage when he raced to the cone with Keaton Crawford, and they ruled him out of bounds. It looked like he did hit the pylon. So really excited about the running back room. Not much cautious optimism there. Let's move on to the receivers, because I think it's clear that Texas has a big three at receiver who I'm excited about. I'm excited about Xavier Worthy, obviously. What a find by Steve Sarkisian as a freshman last year. He breaks all the UT freshman records, 62 receptions, 981 yards, 12 touchdowns. For a true freshman, you will take that all day long. And remember, he's breaking the records of guys like Roy Williams and Jordan Shipley. So Jordan Whittington is a football player. We know this. He was the offensive and defensive MVP in his state championship game at Cuero. I mean, what more can you say? And now he's a guy who's taking this thing seriously in terms of taking care of his body, his diet, doing all the extra hydrotherapy, a hot tub, cold tub. He says he's doing, an additional 2 hours of work with trainers just to keep his body right. And boy, could they use him for an entire season. But also Isaiah Nayer, who if you've been following the Flagship podcast and reading the Insider over at Horns247.com, as you should be, of course, you know that I've already put Isaiah Nayer on my list of immediate impact players among the newcomers on this team. And he showed why. Everyone's going to be dazzled by the 62-yard touchdown pass he caught, perfectly thrown, I might add, by Quinn Ewers. But his blocking, I mean, he was also out there blocking for Xavier Worthy when Worthy picked up like 5 extra yards on a screen and then got drilled by Mo Blackwell. That might help some folks recollect the play I'm talking about. But Nayer was blocking out there, and that's been a problem for the receivers at Texas. I don't know why in the last few seasons, but Isaiah Nayer brings a lot to the table, and he's already getting kudos from his teammates like Jordan Whittington for being a good leader, always doing things the right way, and having a great work ethic. So what I'm not sure about at the receiver position is Ajayi Hall, the incoming transfer from Alabama. Is this the Ajayi Hall who went to 3 different high schools and wore out his welcome with teammates and coaches at Alabama? Or is this the Ajayi Hall who was, one of the top receivers in the country in 2021 and is now ready to really get after it and be a teammate because we know he's talented. We know he can make plays. Just watch the YouTube clips of his Alabama spring game from last year. And I'm not sure about the rest of this receiving core, which is kind of wild. I mean, Marcus Washington's been with this program for, 3 years, Kelvonte Dixon, and obviously there's been some transfers out of the program by, guys like Joshua Moore, Avante Woodard, but I mean, that should absolutely intensify the urgency of guys like Washington, Kelvonte Dixon. And Washington made a couple of nice catches in the spring scrimmage, and then he had one go through his hands. Casey Kane's another guy who had some flashes in the spring. Got to put it together. Got to put it together every single day. Not sure about those guys, but let's move on to tight end. Tight end. I'm cautiously optimistic about Jatavian Sanders and Gunnar Helm, the sophomore tight ends, who, the coaches felt good enough about losing Cade Brewer, who was the blocking tight end on the team last year, and they lost Jared Wiley, who looked like he should have been a blocking tight end at 6'7" and 251 pounds, but he was a former quarterback in high school, and they just couldn't get him to love contact. He's now at TCU. So, they bring in Jaleel Billingsley from Alabama, who's a good pass-catching tight end, almost a big receiver. If you look at him, he's 6'4", 216. But the guys who have to do the dirty work are going to be Jatavian Sanders and Gunnar Helm, and I'm cautiously optimistic about what I saw from them and heard about them in the spring. I think Gunnar Helm caught on to the blocking a little more quickly than Jatavian Sanders, but Sanders, a 5-star recruit last year who a lot of people wanted him to play defensive end because they saw him as a good pass rusher, and he was like, no, I want to play on offense. And so now I think we're seeing the urgency. You got to do it on game day, but cautiously optimistic about the tight end position and cautiously optimistic about the 12 personnel, the 2 tight end sets involving Billingsley, because he is, if he's attached to the line on one side and you got Sanders or Helm on the other side, and then you have Billingsley lined up on a linebacker, that's a great matchup for Texas. And we know Sarkisian knows how to find Billingsley because Billingsley played for Sarkisian at Alabama previously. So he's got a hold of this offense, and by all accounts, he's, I saw him trying to block out there in the spring scrimmage. So I'm cautiously optimistic, kind of across the board at the tight end position. Let's move to the offensive line. I'm not sure about anything on the offensive line. I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic. Excuse me. I'm cautiously optimistic about the continued growth of Jake Majors at center. Junior Angalau played with a pretty severe case of patella tendonitis last year. I'm cautiously optimistic about Junior Angalau having a good final year at Texas. Outside of that, I'm cautiously optimistic about Hayden Connor, who is sort of become the poster child of what Kyle Flood and Steve Sarkisian want from an offensive lineman. Big, strong, tough, not the most, bend, not the most hip flexibility, but, big enough to get in the way. And look, there were some plays in the spring scrimmage where he held his own with Ovi Agofu. And you'll take that. Just get in the way. Just don't whiff. I mean, look, Texas's skill talent is so good, and the quarterback play has a chance to be really good. Just get in the way. Don't give up the sack. Don't give up that that complete whiff that just kills a drive. And that we saw that way too many times last year from the offensive line. Penalties killed this offensive line, especially against Oklahoma in the second half, against TCU. I don't need to relive all that, but this group has the biggest jump. It's not a step, it's a jump that has to be made. And we didn't get to see everything we wanted in the spring because Andre Carrick, who they really sort of set up to win the left tackle position coming out of the spring, ended up getting a high ankle sprain and missed the second half of the spring. And so they had to move Hayden Connor from guard, where he's probably more natural, out to tackle. Hayden Connor held up okay out there, but that's not what you want. Not you want to have guys at tackle with great feet who can dance, really move, and show some elite pass protection. We haven't seen that certainly since Connor Williams and Sam Cosmi moved on. I'm just not sure about a lot at the offensive line position at this point because, I hear good things about Logan Parr as the backup center. I hear good things about, Cole Hudson, the freshman, who you saw quite a bit run with the first team in that spring scrimmage and held up okay. Had some tough moments, but he's a starter kit at this point. And of course you got 6 offensive linemen arriving in June, 2 5-stars, Kelvin Banks and Devin Campbell. Could one of them be so special that they walk right in and win one of the tackle positions, or win one of the guard positions, pushing Hayden Connor out to tackle? We'll have to see. And that for me is not sure, kind of across the board on the offensive line. And then, of course, we get to the quarterback position. And look, I know a lot of Texas fans are excited about the quarterback position. I am cautiously optimistic about the quarterback position because there's still some things that have to be shown. In spring football last year, Hudson Card had the better, fall camp, I'll say. In fall camp, Hudson Card moved ahead of Casey Thompson because he protected the ball better than Casey Thompson did. But then we got into the season and Hudson Card did not have the pocket presence that Casey Thompson had. And so Hudson Card was removed as the starter after 2 games. And in comes Casey Thompson and, ended up leading the Big 12 in touchdown passes. Casey Thompson's gone. Quinn Ewers is here. And there was plenty to like in the spring scrimmage from Quinn Ewers. And from what I'm hearing, he had those kind of wow plays throughout the spring in practices over and over again. Precision passing, unique arm angles, kind of like his Apex training mate, Patrick Mahomes. But I was told that Quinn Ewers led in interceptions by a mile over Hudson Card. And that can't be the case. I mean, Steve Sarkisian talks all the time about protecting the football. So can Quinn Ewers use this summer to get comfortable enough with the offense, to watch enough film to know whether it's man or zone, not get locked in on his receiver and ignore the safety or linebacker just sitting in zone coverage, which I heard happened many times in the spring. And look, that's what spring football is for. Make your mistakes, learn the offense, learn what you can get away with, learn what you can't. But I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm not excited yet because I need to see it. At this point, after starving at the quarterback position from, Vince Young, the guy over my shoulder there, and Colt McCoy, and then to be still on this journey for another quarterback who can lead Texas to a Big 12 championship is kind of crazy. But I'm cautiously optimistic and could get very excited in a hurry if Hudson Card has better pocket presence than he did a year ago when there are actually 300-pound men coming after him, and or B, Quinn Ewers can get comfortable enough with this offense to make big plays but protect the football. I think there's a real chance at some point during the 2022 season that we see the quarterback level of play really improve, increase. And, the question is when. Ideally, it would be at the beginning of the year when they take on Louisiana Monroe in the opener. But, you got Alabama in week 2, Jeff Traylor and UTSA in week 3. When will that quarterback play accelerate? Okay, let's take a quick break here on the Flagship podcast, and I'll come back and tell you what I'm excited about, what I'm cautiously optimistic about, and what I'm just not sure about regarding this Texas defense. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we'll roll on. Let's start with defensive tackle. I'm excited about Byron Murphy. That kid, to me, is a Roy Miller starter kit. And Roy Miller, for those of you who remember the glorious first decade of the 2000s, was one of the more underrated leaders, but just grinder and just did his job every time and ended up playing in the NFL for a good stretch with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think Byron Murphy is that guy, and I think I'm excited about Byron Murphy. I am cautiously optimistic about guys like Alfred Collins, Tavandre Sweat, Vernon Broughton, and even Keandre Coburn, the super senior who's dropped 15 or so pounds and is moving better. And I think the coaches rewarded Coburn with first team reps pretty much throughout the spring for his commitment to drop the weight, get in better shape, and come back and lead this team as a super senior. But we all know the dynamic playmaker at nose tackle is Tavandre Sweat and or Byron Murphy, because I think Murphy is capable of playing both the nose and the 3 technique. But Tavandre Sweat is what the NFL plays with. And Tavandre Sweat is a guy who's been a little bit of an enigma. He had the shoulder injury leading, in last spring. So he missed that critical time under a new coaching staff, and then wasn't in the best of shape and just kind of went through last year with a little bit of indifference. And there was even some question about whether Tavandre Sweat would come back in 2022. I think Tavandre Sweat is now in, but they need him to be in because he does have explosion. He does have the NFL body. He can move at 325 pounds and make plays and just be a big disruptor. But it's got to happen every single play. I'm cautiously optimistic because, Mac Brown used to have a bunch of things that I just would go in one ear and out the other. But the one that sort of stuck, and I think he's right, is you come in as a freshman and even as a sophomore just wanting to play. When you're a junior and senior, you want to win. And Tavandre Sweat is now in that, he's in that window of he should just want to win. And if he sets his mind to it, that's a guy who can be really, really disruptive. And, we haven't even talked about Moro Ojimo, the 5th-year senior defensive lineman who, talked candidly with the media about how he and some veteran guys are trying to get the younger players to burn with the same intensity to win that he has. And he talked about it's difficult because young guys want to chase women, alcohol, and money now that they have that opportunity with NIL. And so Steve Sarkisian said, you all will not be talking to Moro Ojimo anytime soon. But Ojimo's a guy, super senior, who was young. He's not even 21 yet, and he's a 5th-year player. I mean, this kid was like the Doogie Howser of football players when he came to Texas, and it needs to click for him too. You've got depth at one of the most critical positions in college football. I mean, outside of quarterback, you've got to recruit defensive tackles who are difference makers if you want to win championships. I can't tell you how many coaches have been fired because they couldn't recruit defensive tackles. Texas has them to the point where Myron Warren just announced this week that he's going into the transfer portal. And of course, Texas has 4 interior linemen coming in this top 5 2022 recruiting class, including Jere Bledsoe and Aaron Bryant, who were both early enrollees. In fact, Aaron Bryant made a nice play in that spring scrimmage. Someone totally flubbed on the offensive line and left him unblocked, but he knifed in and dropped Jonathan Brooks for a 2-yard loss when Hudson Card was leading the second team offense in 2-minute drill. So there's young talent. You got to stockpile talent at that defensive tackle position. There is no doubt. You can never have enough of those guys. But I'm excited about Byron Murphy, and I'm cautiously optimistic about all the other tackles I just named, because with that kind of depth, Texas should be just fine. Let's go to the defensive end position, and I'm cautiously optimistic about Barron Sorrell, and Justice Finkley. Barron Sorrell, second-year player out of New Orleans, has put on good weight. He's long. I've heard, he was very disruptive in spring, and he pretty much ran first team with that defense all spring. He's a guy they want to develop. And Justice Finkley, the early enrollee freshman, who looks like he's in the third year of a college program, he's so put together, also impressed folks with his ability, his power. He's got speed to power. He's got a bull rush. He's even got a nice rip move. And I think Justice Finkley, there's reason to be cautiously optimistic. I'm not going to go overboard because, well, let's use Prince Dorba as an example. Prince Dorba, who actually got a lot of second team run in the spring, had 3 sacks in the spring game last year, and we never saw him again. So it's how do these guys, these young players especially, handle a little bit of downtime? How do some of them handle some attaboys from the coaching staff? Do they take that as a reason to go out and have a good time, or do they take it as a reason to really bear down and do what they need to do to improve themselves during the off season and bond with teammates and learn their position even better and come back ready to win? That's been a recurring problem at Texas. Moro Ojimo hit on it, and it's got to stop if Texas is ever going to be relevant for conference championships again. So at that defensive end position, I'm cautiously optimistic about Barron Sorrell and Justice Finkley. Ovie Agofu is the veteran. I was a little disappointed in Agofu a year ago, so I'm not sure about Ovie. And obviously, O'Shawn Mathis, the TCU transfer, who graduates here at the end of April from TCU and then is expected to make his announcement, probably going to come down to Texas and Nebraska. If Texas could add O'Shawn Mathis, I would be excited about O'Shawn Mathis. All right, let's get to linebacker, because linebacker, to me, is an area where Texas has to take a huge step forward. And it might be from a guy who was waiting in the wings last year. And I'm talking about middle linebacker Jalen Ford. Jalen Ford has the NFL body. He's got, he's thick, he's physical. And that's what I've heard the most. And we saw that to a degree in the spring scrimmage, that he is playing physical, that he'll come up and take on a guard, take on blocks, which is what you have to do at the linebacker position. It's part of the job, especially at the middle linebacker position. It's one collision after another, because you've got to you got to cancel gaps. And if that means taking on a guard and shoving him back into the ball carrier or shedding that guard and making the tackle, that's what has to happen. And from what I'm hearing, Jaylan Ford is playing with that kind of confidence and intensity and physicality. And I'm cautiously optimistic that Jaylan Ford can bring to this linebacker core a difference-making mentality. I'm also cautiously optimistic about David Benda. Honestly, I'm probably more cautiously optimistic about David Benda because of how physical David Benda plays. David Benda was in on a big-time hit at the goal line with Mo Blackwell, stopping Jaden Blue from the 2-yard line and in the red zone work of that spring scrimmage. And what I've heard is David Benda has been the more physical weak side linebacker, more physical than DeMarvion Overshawn. Now, DeMarvion Overshawn, Agent Zero, super senior, led the team in tackles last year, has unique speed, sideline to sideline speed. And everything I've heard is Benda has been pushing Overshawn to play more physical. That David Benda basically started off the spring with the ones and then was replaced by DeMarvion Overshawn. No matter what, that linebacker tandem and Ovia Gofu, when they put him in that linebacker base set, have to be more physical. They've got to make people pay for coming through the A and B gaps. That has not been the case and wasn't the case all last year against the Texas defense. And that has to change or nothing will get better. From a defense that gave up 31.1 points per game and 202 yards rushing, 5.2 yards per carry. And Moro Jomo said it. The reason you didn't hear much about our pass rush is because no one was passing against us. They were running. And that has to change. The physicality up the middle of the Texas defense has to be light years better than it was a year ago. And that means the defensive tackles. That means Jaylan Ford in the middle. And that means safety. So I am cautiously optimistic about Jaylan Ford, David Benda, and a more physical DeMarvion Overshawn. The rest, I'm not sure about. The rest at that position. Let's move to safety. Now, this is fascinating to me. Texas was loaded at safety 2 years ago. They had, Tyler Owens, Xavier Alford, Chris Adamora, Marcus Caldwell, BJ Foster, Caden Stearns. They're all gone. Only Caden Stearns went on to the NFL. The rest have moved on, transferred out of the program, whatever. So now you've got this melting pot of players who've moved from other positions. Anthony Cook is now at boundary safety after playing nickel, the starting nickel last year. You've got Jaron Thompson, who is the only holdover, basically, along with J.D. Coffey, who didn't play much last year as a freshman, except on special teams. And then you've got Keaton Crawford, who moved from corner to safety. And then you've got Mo Blackwell, who moved from linebacker to safety because he didn't put on weight easily. So coaches looked at Blackwell at safety for a little bit last year and then moved him back to linebacker. But he didn't put on the weight during winter conditioning. So they're like, okay, we got to get you on the field. And Blackwell has pretty much been Anthony Cook's backup at boundary safety all spring. And Blackwell showed up big time in the spring scrimmage with 3 big hits, including probably the hit of the game on Xavier Worthy on the sideline. But Blackwell is a force. He's an enforcer. And we got to see how he holds up in coverage. We got to see if he can juggle everything because he's still processing the move to safety. But you got to get this guy on the field because football matters to him, and you can feel it. And that's how this whole safety group, it's like, why would you be cautiously optimistic about a group that has, limited to no experience at the position, except for Jaron Thompson, who had some real ups and downs last year? Well, I like the mental makeup of these guys because one thing I saw last year from the safety position was some give up late in games when adversity was all over Texas. There were guys who were making some business decisions out there, and it was appalling. I I think the mental makeup of these guys like Anthony Cook, Keaton Crawford, Mo Blackwell, they will stand up and be the last line of defense, and um, and that's what you got to have at the safety position. You got to have a guy who's confident beyond belief, knows what he's looking at, can make the calls, and and then make sure everyone's doing their job. It's a huge position. It's the quarterback of the secondary, and it's going to determine uh, if this is a defense that gives up a lot of big plays, uh, and if this is a defense who can stop the run because your safety's almost always involved in stopping the run. And I know I put out a morning brew this week that said Texas will be better at safety in 2022. Part of that is almost by default. I don't think they can be much worse, but I like the mental makeup of this group. They're not all ideal sized. A guy like Keaton Crawford, undersized, but he will hit you. He's competitive, and it matters to him. And that's what, man, winning has got to matter to every player on this Texas team. And I know there's been talk that guys have gotten used to being middle of the pack, so they just kind of roll their eyes or shrug their shoulders. You got to have a group now that is sick and tired of it, so sick and tired of it that it's got to change. And I think the veteran guys who've been moved to safety, and obviously I'm talking about Keaton Crawford, Anthony Cook the most, and Jaron Thompson. Look, Jaron Thompson was up and down. There were some frustrating plays, but Jaron Thompson can figure it out. I mean, I remember Brandon Jones as a sophomore, still indecisive, 5-star player. His junior year, he might have been the best player on the team. That light can go on, and it can go on like a floodlight. And that's what Texas needs. Blake Gideon's back there coaching them. Blake Gideon was a guy who got it, figured it out as a freshman, started 4 years. And so I'm cautiously optimistic, almost excited that this safety position will be better than last year, but I got to see it. I'm not gonna move into excited. Although I'm excited about Mo Blackwell. I don't care how, you got to keep that guy in the field. All right, let's go to nickel because Jahdae Barron, who moves from corner to nickel corner, is another guy who, local kid, junkyard dog. Football matters to him. He's not the ideal size. He's not the big time recruit. He just loves football and he makes plays and he sees it. He can process it. He can digest it. He's a good communicator. I'm cautiously optimistic about Jahdae Barron at nickel. And, Jaron Thompson kind of floats between nickel and safety. If something happened to Jahdae Barron, you'd probably have Jaron Thompson move to nickel. And then, Keaton Crawford would take over at safety. But I like Jahdae Barron. And I think, I'm cautiously optimistic about what he brings to the table. Because, again, he's a guy who loves football, mentality, wants to win, isn't going to, roll his eyes or throw his shoulders and, stop chasing a guy on a 71-yard run by K-State's quarterback who looks like a stork and somehow ran for 71 yards on the Texas defense in the last play of the game. And that's really kind of when these changes all started in the secondary. Okay, and finally at corner, um, I'm cautiously optimistic about Ryan Watts, the 6'3" transfer from Ohio State, who has basically held down that boundary corner position since he got here in January and looked okay in the spring scrimmage. Um, you didn't hear his name one way or the other, good or bad. I saw him, he did miss a tackle. We got to work on that. But I'm cautiously optimistic about Jameer Johnson. And I was I was kind of excited about Jalen Gilbo. I'm not going to lie. I had Ryan Watts and Jalen Gilbo on my list of immediate impact newcomers, along with Isaiah Nayer. And then Jalen Gilbo was suspended for a violation of team rules. And I reported in the Insider um, a week ago that that's going to get worked out as long as there's no more slip ups by Gilbo. But Gilbo was getting first team reps along with Deshawn Jameson at the field corner position. And Deshawn Jameson is a guy who's been a bit of an enigma because he had a really good spring from a standpoint of interceptions, making plays on the ball. He's a ball hawk. He's a super senior. I mean, the urgency should be off the charts for this guy. He's also number 4 all time in kick return yards for Texas. But he didn't have inside leverage on a 25-yard skinny post touchdown to Xavier Worthy in the spring scrimmage, and Michael Griffin, Kenny Vaccaro, who were on the call for LHN, were like, "What are you doing?" And you can't have that kind of mistake from a super senior. And so I'm not sure. I hope that Deshawn Jameson gets it, cautiously optimistic, but I'm not sure. And so that cornerback position with Gilbo getting suspended, I'm really not quite sure where Texas is at that cornerback position because the best option to replace Deshawn Jameson if he struggles was Jalen Gilbo through the spring, through the first 7 practices of spring, I should say, before Gilbo got suspended. So that was probably one of the biggest disappointments, if not the biggest disappointment, along with Andre Carrick's high ankle sprain from the spring, was Gilbo getting suspended after hearing how well he was doing through the first 7 practices of spring. All right, we'll wrap it up on special teams, and I'm cautiously optimistic about Isaac Pearson. He had a good spring, and the cool thing about Pearson, he's the latest Pro Kick Australia addition to the Texas Longhorns, joining Michael Dixon, the former Ray Guy Award winner, and Ryan Buchevsky, who was beat out by Cameron Dicker last year as Texas's punter, and then entered the transfer portal after last season. But Isaac Pearson's got a big leg, and he can boom it. He can hit that little underspin punt for, when you're punting from the 50 and you're trying to put it inside the 5. He can rugby punt it. I think Isaac Pearson's going to be okay. At field goal kicker, I'm not sure at all. I'm with all of you. I mean, I didn't hear anything good. I mean, when I asked sources about it, they talked about Will Stone, the incoming freshman who arrives in June. No pressure, Will Stone, but man, I think Longhorn Nation is hoping, maybe even expecting, you to be the next Cameron Dicker, who can just come in as a freshman, handle it, and make everyone forget about needing to worry about field goals. And that's a lot because Cameron Dicker is now the all-time points leader at Texas among kickers. And Texas has had some good ones. Phil Dawson, Justin Tucker, to name a couple. The other question mark was at long snapper because Justin Motter graduated, and now Zach Edwards takes over, and Zach Edwards looked good. And from what I hear in camp, was solid on his snaps for field goals and punts. So cautiously optimistic about Isaac Pearson and Zach Edwards. Have no clue about the field goal kicking. Come on down, Will Stone. And in the return game, obviously, you've got weapons, man. You've got Deshawn Jameson, number 4 all time at UT in kick return yards. You've got Xavier Worthy. You've got Keelan Robinson. You got guys. You should be able to make a difference in the return game. So there you have it. What I'm excited about, what I'm cautiously optimistic about, and what I'm just not sure about regarding the Texas Longhorns following the 2022 spring football. So thanks for listening, everybody. Next week, I'm sure we'll have Taylor Estes back on the show. But until then, we'll see you over at horns247.com. Tell your friends and enemies to sign up. And until next time, I'm Chip Brown. Stay safe and keep the faith.